Hatred and Discipline by Micky Neilson. Read by Katie Bunn. Vala smelled the rotting dead from a mile away. The air was warm despite the clouds that blanketed Honduras as the demon hunter arrived in what was left of Holbrook, once a tiny, struggling farm community, now a deserted ghost town. Or so it seemed. The heavy stench of putrefaction suggested that the residents were still present, just not among the living. Vala's mentor, Josen, stood in the center of the village, considering a pile of debris, scattered mason stones, upturned rock and soil. He was dressed in the attire of the demon hunter's calling. The soft light reflected dully off the plate armor that adorned half of his body. His twin crossbows were slung from his thighs, within easy reach. His hood was down, and his cloak snapped in the gusting wind. Vala was clothed in a similar fashion, the greatest difference being the long, dark scarf she wore that even now covered the lower half of her face. The sawyer's daughter slowed her horse, dismounted, and waited for a moment, silent and still, assessing. There was a barely discernible, persistent hum, the only signs of life that came from Josen and the two other hunters, one searching the derelict structure, another standing near the run-down storehouse. Whatever had happened here, they were too late to do anything about it. Now it was a matter of looking for survivors. That was, after all, the second most important thing her people did: feed and shelter those left homeless in the aftermath of unthinkable catastrophe. Guide them, encourage them, heal them, educate and train them to do the most important thing, should they so choose: become a demon hunter and annihilate the hellspawn responsible for evils like this. Josen continued studying the rebel intently as Vala approached. "I came as quickly as I could," she stated, lowering her scarf. The faint thrumming sound droned on. Josen's eyes remained fixed. "We should not be here." His voice was loose gravel. "Had Delios succeeded in his task, we would not be here." His shimmering eyes finally met hers. "Tell me what you see." Vala gazed at the upheaval. The masonry and timber were familiar, as was a dark liquid splattered across them. But there was also a black substance throughout, like tar, that she did not recognize. "The town well," Vala offered. "The demon emerged from here, wounded, given the presence of demon blood. Delios managed that much at least. I only pray that he died a hunter's death." Josen kicked the dirt. Beneath the surface the soil was wet. "This happened not more than a day ago. After." Vala waited for Josen to continue. When he didn't, she asked, "After what?" The master hunter's expression was unreadable. "Follow me," he replied. As they approached the storehouse, the hum rose in volume, a penetrating, vibrant buzz. As the thrumming grew, the fetid stench grew also. The hunter stationed out front swung open the tall doors. A thick, dark mass, a living cloud of flies, escaped, and though the smell of degenerating flesh was familiar to Vala, the potency of its assault nearly drove her to her knees. She pulled her scarf tight and choked back bile. Within the barn-sized enclosure, the townspeople were piled in haphazard mounds. Men, women, many of them bloated, their midsections distended. Some of the bodies had ruptured, inside spilling out, maggots working their way over and through the viscera. Fluid seeped from eyes, noses, mouths. Beneath the odor of decomposition was the unmistakable smell of feces. Hundreds of flies swarmed the carnage. Vala frowned. The wounds, while gruesome, were not those common to hellspawn attacks. These were stabbings, impalements, crushed skulls, not the shredding, dismemberment, and decapitation associated with most demon slayings. Josen spoke. "Delios was seen 1 day ago outside of Bramwell. He stormed the bordello, killing everyone, then disappeared. Last night there was another massacre. 15 victims inside an opium den, killed by crossbow bolt and blade." Vala's eyes widened in disbelief. Josen answered her unspeakable question. "He fell to the demon's corruption. He's lost to us now, no better than a demon himself." It was a horrific development, one every demon hunter faced, navigating the threshold between good and evil. all too easy for hunters to lose their ability to control their fear or hatred and cross over to the other side. But this was not the work of Delios. This was something different. Vala hid her unease. Perhaps that is so, but no hunter is responsible for what we see here. No demon either. Agreed. Do you think they turned on one another? Possible, Josen answered flatly before departing. Vala scanned the corpse mounds once more, noting something odd. There were no children among them. Outside, Josen stood at his horse. Vala hurried to him. I completed my last assignment. What orders now? We continue searching for survivors. Come sunrise, I'll ride to Bramwell, and I'll find Delios. Perhaps it's not too late for him, the master hunter said, but his minor hesitation spoke differently. Vala squared her shoulders. I'll go and seek out the demon then. No, Josen shot back. You are not ready. Vala stepped closer. Come again? The master hunter turned to her, his tone remaining even. I said you're not ready. We know very little of what we're dealing with, what its methods are. We believe it's a demon that feeds on terror, but Delios had that information as well, and it wasn't enough to prepare him. A demon such as this. Josen's eyes fell slightly. It will reach into your mind and uncover every fear, every doubt, every regret, no matter how deeply buried. It will pit you against yourself. The master hunter's eyes snapped up, locking on Vala. Remember your failure at the ruins. That was different. A demon of rage, Vala protested. Rage, hate, fear, they all feed on one another. A demon hunter learns how to direct hate, but such a balance is precarious, and when that balance is lost, the cycle begins. Hate begets destruction, destruction begets terror, as terror begets hate, as... I've heard it 1,000 times, Vala blurted. Then mark it well. You're still young, and you have much to learn. If I've taught you anything, it's that a demon hunter must always temper hatred with discipline. So calm yourself. The demon is wounded, inactive for now. I'll send another hunter. Josen turned to leave, but Vala was not done. I'll go after Delios then. Josen looked back. You'll stay and help search for survivors. Delios is mine. Those are my orders. The master hunter strode away, calmly, and somehow that infuriated Vala all the more. She wanted him to yell, to scream, to show some damned hint of emotion. Not ready? I'm not ready? After all I've been through. How dare you tell me what I'm not ready for, Vala whispered. An instant later she was astride her horse. Which way? Which way would the demon have gone? Vala glanced at the blood among the debris. There was no trail outside the radius of the cast-off, no help there. To the east sat only mountains, to the west the Gulf of Westmarch. Far to the south lay New Tristram. But the demon was wounded. Would it take a chance on a longer journey south, or would it travel northeast, where it might find more small farming communities like this one? More easy prey. The closest village, Havenwood, was less than a day away. The choice was made. Ellis Halstaff was concerned for her daughter's health. Samantha lay in the downstairs bedroom, a cold wet cloth draped across her forehead, her breathing shallow. Sam had woken up the previous night, screaming. Had taken a fair amount of time to calm the girl down. When Ellis finally did, and asked what was wrong, her daughter replied that, "It feels like there's something bad inside my head." Bellick, Havenwood's healer, had visited earlier in the day. He had provided a tonic that would allow Sam to rest, and prescribed a cold bath when the opportunity allowed. But Sam was resting now, and Ellis's little son, Raylan, would need to be fed. And there was still work to be done before nightfall. It was easier before, in the days when Sam's father was still present, before he left without a word, without so much as a note, never to return. Ellis looked down at Sam now and thought of the girl's most recent birthday, when the precocious 7-year-old had declared brazenly that she would manage her own affairs moving forward, and that her daily routine would no longer include chores. She thought of Sam's laughter, a hearty, unbridled guffaw. She thought of the night less than a week ago when Sam had told her, in the strictest of confidence, that she had a crush on little Joshua Gray because his eyes were like a nice dream. She thought of these things, and she prayed to Akarat that Sam would get well soon, that she would have many more nice dreams and no longer be terrified of whatever ailment had befallen her. Vala sat before the campfire, still a few miles outside of Havenwood, staring. She ran her finger absently over a long scar that traveled the line of her jaw. "You're not ready. A demon hunter must always temper hatred with discipline." Josen's words still stung, but the more she thought of it, the more she considered that maybe he wasn't exactly wrong. Her thoughts drifted back to the incident at the ruins. She and Delios had journeyed deep into the southern Dreadlands, traveling together for several days. Delios was crude and abrasive and set her nerves on edge. Vala preferred to operate alone, but Josen had insisted they work as a pair. They located the demon's hideaway among the long-forgotten ruins of some unknown civilization. Vala guarded her mind as Josen had taught her. He had warned them both that, with a powerful demon such as this, the battle would be much more than simply physical. "You are the demon's greatest weapon," he had counseled. As the two wound their way down wide, monolithic stone slabs, Vala felt her agitation mounting. The base of the stairs opened into a cavernous grotto where hundreds of gargantuan rocky pillars stretched upward, their caps lost in the darkness above. Flaming braziers cast pools of flickering light. Delios surged ahead. He was reckless, foolish. Vala's head throbbed. She could feel the demon infiltrating her thoughts. In her mind's eye, its presence was black tendrils, probing, coaxing, provoking. Vala dwelled on every infuriating habit, every negative quality Delios possessed. Her agitation soon turned to anger, which turned to rage. Delios darted ahead again, after she had yelled at him to stop. He spun, favoring her with a wicked smile. She became suddenly certain that he had been corrupted. He had crossed over. Her rage boiled into her blind fury, and she knew that she would kill him. He was weak, pathetic. Ending his life would be a mercy. She drove forward. Delios stood there, smiling tauntingly. She sprinted toward him. He ducked behind a pillar. Vala frowned. And he was gone. She felt the demon behind her, a hulking, otherworldly presence. Inside her mind, she could hear an echo of laughter. The demon had manipulated her with the ease of a puppeteer working the strings on a marionette. The Delios she had followed was not real. She had lost, and now she would die. There was an explosion then, and much of what happened next Vala only remembered in brief flashes. Josen battling the demon, Delios rushing to help, Vala gathering her senses in time to fire several bolts from her crossbow, Josen shouting words of banishment. "I see you, Draxiel, lapdog of Mephisto. In the name of all those who have suffered, I cast you out. Begone and be damned, and may you never return." Josen fired a bolt, an eye-searing brilliance flared, and the demon was gone. The ruins had been a test. Josen was fond of saying that everything was a test, that life was a test, and Vala had failed. Now Delios had failed as well, and it had cost him his soul. Vala was determined to defeat the demon, but she was also determined not to meet Delios' fate. He's lost to us now, no better than a demon himself. The sawyer's daughter suppressed a shudder. There was more than one way to banish a demon, but only one way that Josen had taught her. He had also told her once that when a demon peers into you, you may peer back, but it is the most dangerous thing that a demon hunter can do. Vala's mistake at the ruins would not be repeated. She had grown too much since then. The demon hunter retrieved from her pocket an etching of her little sister, Helisa. "For you," she whispered, and as the flames of the campfire died down, she initiated a series of mental exercises taught to her by Josen. "I'm not going to make it," Ellis Halstaff thought. I've lost too much blood. Escaping through the front door and sprinting to Havenwood proper were not an option. Not before she reached Raylan. He was practically helpless, barely a year and a half old. He hadn't even mastered walking yet, much less protecting himself in any way. At the staircase, she pulled with her good hand on the banister, dragging her worthless right leg behind one step at a time. As her strength ebbed, she thought of Sam and wondered desperately why her daughter was trying to kill her. After finishing her work, Alice had gone in to check on Sam, to see if perhaps she was ready for a bath. Sam had smiled, pulled Alice's best carving knife from beneath the sheets, and stabbed her in the leg, then repeatedly in the torso. 5, 6 times, maybe more. Alice had spent precious heartbeats immobilized by the shock of the attack before she had finally run. Alice's head felt foggy now. She was halfway up the staircase when she heard the rapid padding of Sam's bare feet on the floor below. She turned, and there, at the bottom of the stairs, her beautiful blonde-haired daughter stood, clothed in the lacy pink dress Alice had saved up to buy her for the harvest festival. The cloth was splattered a dark crimson that glittered in the lamplight. Sam held the knife in her right hand. Blood coated her arm from the elbow down, dripping from the tip of the blade. "Wait, Mama, I still need to get you." She thinks it's a game. How can she think it's a game? Alice hauled herself backwards up one more step. Sam bounded over 2 stairs in one leap. "I said wait!" She slipped in the trail of blood on the step, pitching forward, her right arm arcing overhead, burying the blade in the stair Alice had just cleared. The sound of her own screams drowned out all other noise as Alice whipped around and hopped up the last 2 steps to the 2nd floor. She closed the distance to Raylan's room in desperate lurches, her useless right leg dragging behind. "Once inside, I can bar the door, then maybe—" Alice hit the doorway and froze. Raylan was not in his crib. What was more, the wooden railing had been broken, pieces of it scattered on the floor. The lightheadedness was more persistent now, as Alice reached out to the broken railing for support. Her limbs felt cold, responding slowly to what her mind willed them to do. "There you are!" Alice spun to see Sam in the doorway, a huge grin on her face, the kind she got when she would play roughhouse with Papa in the days before he left. The world teetered. Alice took a step back. She grasped a splintered piece of railing, long and deathly sharp in one hand. She pulled it free and thrust it in front of herself with shaky hands. "What did you do, Sam? What did you do to your brother?" Sam lowered her knife, her puffy lips turned down at the corners, eyebrows knitted, her eyes wide and moist. It was the look she got when she did something she wasn't supposed to do and she was trying to escape punishment. "Are you going to hurt me, Mama?" The floor swayed like the deck of a ship on a restless sea. Alice was vaguely aware that her hand and the stake were drifting lazily. "I just want to know why," Alice sobbed, her voice sounding detached. "Is it because you're sick? We can get you help. We can get Bellick and—" She felt a sharp pain on the back of her good ankle then, a piercing clamp that shot an agonized jolt through her entire body as she cried out. Alice looked down to see Raylan where he had crawled out from under the crib. He gazed up at her warmly and offered a wide grin, his tiny teeth covered in a layer of bright red. The world swam away as darkness closed in. Alice's arm dropped, her head lolled back, and mercilessly she did not feel the long blade as Sam plunged it through her chest. Vala reached the outskirts of Havenwood shortly before midnight. The time of her arrival was not of her choosing, but it suited her nonetheless. She would not be welcome in the town, her kind never was. Demon hunters were seen as dark omens, harbingers of death, even on their best days. The air was still warm as she passed moonlit fields thronged with barren cornstalks, and wide patches of land where rows of gathered wheat bushels stood like obedient soldiers. Harvest was underway. Vala's ears were soon greeted with the sound of rushing water. A river. The sawyer's daughter felt a hollow tug in the pit of her stomach as she rode on. The innkeeper turned pale at the sight of her. even though she had removed her hood and lowered her scarf to put him more at ease. He responded to her queries in minimal sentences. There had been no signs of trouble, nothing outside of the ordinary, no cause for concern. She gave him a note to pass on to the town healer come first light. Any sign of trouble, send for me. Upon entering her lodging, Vala went through her routine checklist, noting several details. A sturdy sideboard suitable for use as a barricade, if necessary. No connecting door to the adjoining room. A bed positioned against the far wall with a clear view of the entry. A single desk and chair, and one window with a 10-cubit drop to the ground outside. Vala then removed her plate armor and numerous weapons. She placed the twin crossbows, daggers, darts, bolas, and a quiver of bolts, taking special care with one bolt, crimson with runes adorning the shaft, within easy reach of the bed. She began to unpack. Throughout, the sawyer's daughter could not escape the nagging sensation that had vexed her on the ride in, that she was forgetting something. Something important. Something vital. It was as if there was a void in her mind, an emptiness where some essential knowledge had once been stored. She finished her unpacking, then sat on the floor and closed her eyes, quieting her mind. She focused on the rhythm of her pulse. Whatever it was that she had forgotten was not coming to her. Other thoughts then intruded as well. What if she was wrong about all this? What if she had disobeyed Josen for nothing? Worrying about that now would do her no good, she decided, and the errant memory would return to her in time. Vala moved to the desk and wrote a short letter to her beloved sister, Helisa. She recounted the details of her journey, told her that all was well, told her that she loved her and that she would come visit her soon. And she hoped that was true. Maybe after this demon was dispatched, maybe she could take some time away. She folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, then deposited the envelope in her travel bag. Vala snuffed the candle and lay on her side, her mind working to retrieve what she felt was lost. She sighed heavily and wished desperately, as she did every night, for a sleep without nightmares of the attack on her village. She wished, as she did every night, that just once she could dream of something good. She had forgotten what it was like to dream of anything but slaughter. Kegan Gray stumbled through the doorway of his farmhouse, having relieved himself in the flower garden outside moments earlier. Soretta would not be pleased if she found out, but she would also keep silent on the matter if she knew what was good for her. She hadn't known such things when they were first married, but over the years she had learned. Sometimes the lessons were hard, but necessary. The lamp beside the door was unlit, a matter Kegan would take up with Soretta come sunrise. A man could break his damn leg walking into a dark house. After 3 tries, Kegan succeeded in lighting the wick. Kegan absently wondered where Rex was as he headed for the scullery. On the nights when Kegan would come home late from the tavern, Rex would normally greet him at the door, tongue lolling, tail wagging excitedly. Of course, Rex preferred to sleep in Joshua's room. He was most likely there now, curled at the foot of the bed. The scullery table was bare. Kegan felt the aggravation well up inside, causing his hands to reflexively curl into fists as his jaws clenched. Soretta had been told to have a helping of supper waiting for him. She couldn't be that foolish. Kegan considered that perhaps Joshua had eaten his portion. If so, the boy would have to be punished. Punished sternly, as was warranted in such matters. For now, though, it looked as if Kegan would be forced to cut his own meat. The ride from town had stoked quite a hunger, after all. Snatching a knife from the table, Kegan thrust the lamp before him as he stalked toward the larder. He barged into the long, pitch-black room, lamplight revealing a few sizable chunks of butchered pig hanging on hooks lining the wall to his right. He stood at a thick hog leg and smiled. Kegan bent over to set down the lamp so he could cut off a slice, and as he did so, he noticed a puddle of something dark like wine on the floor. He held the lamp closer. Blood. The sight sobered him slightly. There shouldn't be blood on the floor. The hogs were gutted and cleaned outside. It was pooled between his legs, emanating from somewhere behind him. Rising and turning, Kegan lifted the lamp, then nearly dropped it as he stepped back. Rex was dangling from a hook on the opposite wall, hung by the soft flesh under the jaw. Blood matted his fur and was still dripping from his tail. Most of his insides had been scooped out and were piled in the corner. A warm breeze rolled in as the door at the end of the larder was opened from outside. The lamplight could not illuminate far enough for Kegan to see. He held the lamp down in a way to let his eyes adjust. A voice drifted to him. "Father?" "Joshua, get in here, boy. What are you doing outside?" Kegan still could not make out much more than a dark blur beyond the light. "I said get in here. Someone's killed the dog. Do as I say, boy. Move." His eyes adjusted enough to see his son's silhouette then, standing motionless in the doorway, a long-handled scythe held in both hands, its curved blade etched in sharp relief against the moon and clouds. "But there's still reaping to do, Father." Kegan's mouth hung open as he stumbled forward. "What did you say, boy? Have you gone soft in the head?" A few more steps and the lamp cast light on Joshua. His work clothes were stained, the same wine color that covered the floor. "Did you do this? Did you kill the dog, you sick little—" Without a word, Joshua stepped forward and swung. Kegan raised his left arm to block, but at the last second the boy brought the scythe down and across, between Kegan's ribs, ripping through his guts, the blade penetrating deep enough to leave the gore-soaked tip exposed on the other side. A gurgling sound worked its way through Kegan's throat, escaping as a rattle from his open mouth. The boy had struck him like a damn pig. He would answer for that. Come what may, the boy would be punished, harshly. Joshua pulled the blade free, a mistake Kegan took full advantage of. Advancing quickly, he buried the kitchen knife to the hilt in Joshua's throat. His son fell back like a stone. Despite the scythe blade's absence, a searing pain scorched Kegan's belly. He coughed up and spewed a massive spout of blood, and then he ran. He had killed his son. Now all he could think to do was get away, run as far and as fast as he possibly could. He headed straight into the cornfields, heedless of the stalks he crushed or drove aside, stumbling, spitting blood, dizziness threatening to topple him at any instant. He ran as fast as his feet would allow, until the pain in his stomach at last forced him to his knees. He had ended at the base of the field scarecrow. He needed to get away. If only he could regain his feet. If he could reach the town. If he could get to Bellick the healer. Kegan clenched the pants of the scarecrow, pulling himself up, a long stream of mucus and blood dangling from his chin. The material beneath his closed fist, however, did not feel like straw. And there was blood soaking the cloth. Was it his blood? Consciousness was slipping. Kegan hacked violently, pulling himself up the rest of the way, and raised his head to see the face of the scarecrow, and saw instead the slackened, horror-stricken visage of his dead wife. Just before dawn the following morning, Vala stood beside a sheet-covered corpse in Bellick's study. The blood spreading out from the head had already begun to dry on the cloth. "Who is it?" Vala asked. "Durgan, the blacksmith. He could barely speak when he came to my door. Only said a few words before he passed on, but that was more'n enough." "What did he say?" "Eh?" Bellick was a relic of a man, thin and stooped, and hard of hearing despite his overgrown ears. His discomfort in her presence was palpable. "The smith's words, what were they?" Vala asked louder. "Oh." The healer attempted to pull back the sheet, but the drying blood held it fast. Bellick yanked and the cloth came free, revealing a weathered man, one half of his head misshapen from a blow. "He said, 'My boy did this to me.'" Vala was silent for a long moment, looking, and there was that sensation again. The worrisome notion that she was forgetting something important. She pushed it to the back of her mind, focusing once more on the situation at hand, on the dead man betrayed by his own son. There was a scream then from the street outside, desperate death wail of someone whose life was coming to a violent end. Vala spun for the door. "Stay here." An instant later, she stepped into the pre-dawn light. In the street, a boy, perhaps 13, stood over the body of a female merchant. The boy held a smith's hammer, its head covered in pulp. What was left of the merchant's skull was strewn among the wares arrayed nearby on a ragged blanket. Vala thought of the fact that there had been no children among the bodies in the storehouse in Holbrook, and suddenly she understood. There were no children because they had done the killing. Pawns doing the demon's bidding. For a brief moment, Vala was so shocked, so unsettled by the very idea, that she was off her guard, vulnerable. She came to her senses and continued to assess the situation. She must act soon or die. The scream had drawn others out now as well, but Vala took special note of the little blonde-haired girl in a pink dress at the end of the thoroughfare. She held a crimson-stained knife in one hand and supported a bloody, ravenous-looking infant on the opposite hip. Her eyes were wide and bright. There was a creaking noise on the overlook above Vala's position, someone stepping out, but a short, high creak, indicating a person of light weight. Another child. The smith's boy was approaching Vala now with an open-mouthed smile. 2 other kids appeared in the gathering, one small boy dragging a sheathed sword, and an older girl with a large stone held in both hands. Then a final child, a fiery red-haired boy missing 2 front teeth, skipping with a hatchet in his right hand. A small crowd of 5 adults had emerged onto the street as well. A few faces peered from outside. "Anyone of a mind to not get hurt best get behind locked doors," Vala commanded from beneath her hood. "Now!" The adults in the crowd complied. Bellick stood at the window, watching. He would have considered the woman beautiful once, back when he cared about such things. Now he only saw a harbinger of doom. It was known. Where the demon hunters went, death followed. The townspeople had moved inside, but the children had stayed outside, and they were positioning to attack. The smith's words came back to Bellick. "My boy did this to me." What sort of madness had overtaken the world to turn children into butchers? And the woman, the demon hunters, surely she would kill them. A cloudburst of smoke exploded from the woman's feet and immediately billowed, obscuring her from sight. An instant later, a small form dropped down into the haze from the lookout above Bellick's viewpoint. As the cloud began to clear, a hatchet flew end over end, missing the child who had jumped down by scant inches. Bellick's head swiveled to see a figure rise to a stand several feet away in the thinning dark mist. It was her. The smoke had been a distraction executed by the hunter. Her wrist flicked, and a little red-headed boy who had skipped into view, the Travers boy Bellick thought it must be, slapped a hand to his neck as if he'd been bitten. Bellick's chest tightened. She's killing them. The smith's son, Kindle, rushed forward, eyes bulging, spit flying from his open mouth. He swung the hammer in a wide arc. The demon hunter stepped in, grabbed the boy's wrist, and turned into his swing, circling him around and sending him crashing into a boy Bellick didn't recognize, who was in the process of trying to pull a sword that was larger than he was out of its sheath. That boy went flat on his back. The demon hunter snatched the hammer and swung it underhand, smashing the head into the bottom of Kindle's jaw. Teeth flew. The woman sidestepped, and Kindle toppled onto his face, out cold. A few feet away, the Travers boy, hand still pressed to his neck, fell down in a heap. The demon hunter's hand flicked outward again, toward the child who had dropped from the lookout, someone else Bellick didn't recognize, like the boy with the sword. Visitors from Holbrook, perhaps? Bellick's hand tightened into fist. Outside, 2 children rushed the woman. Samantha Halstaff, bounding forward as if playing a game of kickball, waving a bloody dagger before her, and Bree Tunis, hefting a weighty stone above her head. Bellick had seen acrobats from the distant land of Anstey years ago in Chaldeum. They flipped and tumbled, somersaulted and cartwheeled with an ease that was nothing short of incredible. The healer was reminded now of those acrobats as he watched the woman leap upward, tuck and roll into a ball, unhindered by the hard-edged plate mail she wore, landing behind Samantha. It was a blur of motion and almost too quick for the eye to follow, but most amazingly of all, after the demon hunter's passing, Samantha stood bound in a thin rope. Not far away, the stranger who had jumped from the lookout collapsed just as the Travers boy had done. Enough! Bellick ran to the door and opened it as the demon hunter spun, swinging Samantha next to Bree, her movements impossibly fast, arms whipping like a flag snapping in a gale. When she was done, both girls were bound. Samantha's brother, little Raylan, was crawling forward, seemingly in an attempt to gnash his teeth into the demon hunter's leg. She lifted him up, drew her dagger. "No!" Bellick called out, and drove it through the back of the boy's shirt into a nearby support beam, leaving the child kicking and flailing harmlessly. She turned and strode toward Bellick. "The children," he breathed, "are alive. I used darts coated in a strong sedative. They're safe for now and will remain so only with your help." Bellick's fists unclenched. His shoulders sagged in relief. "You're surprised?" Vala asked. "It is said by some that your kind—" Bellick looked down. "Say it," Vala challenged. Bellick summoned his courage. "Are no better than the demons. That your eyes burn with hellfire. That everywhere you go, death follows." Vala stepped closer to Bellick, who stumbled backwards. "It is said that when a demon peers into you, healer, into the deepest recesses of your mind, then you may peer back if you know how, and then you will see only vengeance, only the hunt, and your eyes will burn with obsession." Bellick's lower lip quivered. "Your eyes do not burn." Vala's features softened. "No, I live for more than vengeance," Vala turned. "Now I need a place where the children can be held, separately." The healer thought for a moment. "We got no more than one jail cell, but we got stables for the pack beasts. Stables could work, surely." Vala stood looking through the small barbed window into the stable stall. Samantha sat there, hands and feet lashed together, head inclined, straight blonde hair concealing her face. The rest of the children were held in the remaining stalls, 2 or 3 in some, but Vala had insisted Samantha be kept alone. When the children had been transported here, a throng of townspeople had gathered around the wagons used to haul the young ones to the stables. Many of the citizens had grown violent, and much of their ire was directed at Vala. But Bellick they trusted, and it was his counsel that had averted catastrophe, for the time being at least. The people waited outside the stables even now. Vala could hear the echoing din of their curses and lamentations. Bellick had just finished speaking to them. They want to know, why is this happening? Why the children? Vala opened the stall door, stepped inside, and kneeled in the dry straw. "Lock the door behind me." "But—" "Do it." As she heard the latch being slid into place, Vala parted Samantha's hair. She tilted the girl's chin up. The little one's eyes were closed. The blonde hair, the fair skin, reminded her so much of Halissa. She thought of how Halissa's face always lit up at the sight of her older sister. She thought of Halissa's bright, inquisitive eyes and boundless energy. Vala could not show weakness to the healer, but now a wave of nausea rolled through her, a tide of sadness and disgust, and suddenly Vala felt very tired in both body and soul. She remembered her village in Westmarch. She remembered her family. She fought back the rapidly unfolding memories of the massacre when she herself had been little more than a child, the same flashes that plagued her night after night. Screams of the dead and dying, blood, a demon claw swiping at her neck but cutting her jaw instead, running, Halissa's hand in hers, hiding near the river, and, later, being found by the others who had suffered similar fates, learning of the demon hunters, being mentored by Josen, remade into an avatar of vengeance, a weapon forged to strike at the heart of darkness. Vala had been absently rubbing the scar on her jaw. She leaned close to Samantha. "Speak, demon." Vala waited. No response. Do not play coy with me. This is a game you cannot win. Your only hope is to be sent back to your light-cursed master, to pray that perhaps the hells will show you mercy, because I will not. Now speak your name. Samantha did not stir. Lowering the girl's head, Vala rose and stood at the barred window. Healer, you asked if there was a reason this demon chose the children, and I tell you yes. This pathetic wretch of a hellspawn chose the young ones because it is weak and the fledglings are vulnerable, easy prey for the scum that begs for scraps discarded by its masters. Bellick was standing just inside Vala's view. He stared at her, eyebrows raised. Vala felt it then, movement behind her, accompanied by the faintest sound. The sawyer's daughter turned to see the girl standing on her toes, back arched, head tucked against her shoulder. Her hair had fallen from a face broken out in veins, her eyes wide, unfocused, bloodshot. When her mouth opened, it seemed to almost struggle in forming the words at first. Then, "Turn not your back, O prideful one!" The voice was a loud, grating strain, like a continuous intake of breath. "Seek you to stand before me?" The girl's head whipped from one shoulder to the other. "Such reaching exceeds your grasp, sub-creature. A distraction, none the less, I might find amusing. Release me then, and see." Vala drew a blade. Bellick protested, his hands pressed tight against his ears, lips quivering. Vala appeared not to notice as she severed the bonds holding Samantha. Let us see indeed. Settling back on her feet, the child took 2 halting steps. Vala moved to the side, and the girl lurched forward to stand before the barred door. Her head rotated, chain rolling over her shoulder, vacant eyes staring. "Come!" Vala called to Bellick. "Unlock the door." Bellick's eyes shot back and forth between Samantha and Vala. "Is it safe?" "No harm will come. I'll see to it." After an instant's hesitation, Bellick did as he was instructed. The girl, chin to her chest and hair hanging so that it was impossible for her to see where she walked, nonetheless proceeded unerringly into the stable. Bellick gave her a wide berth, and then he and Vala followed the girl past the first stalls where the other children were held. To their right, the older girl who had hefted a stone earlier stood at the door, grasping at the bars, and when she spoke, it was in the gushing voice of the demon. "I am old Festos! I am the infiltrator, procurer, herd of the wretched, and flayer of the writhing damned!" Bellick glanced about in horror, his palms pressed once again to his ears as Samantha shuffled on. The boy who had dragged the sword through the street pulled himself up to peer through a window on the other side, the voice continuing, issuing now from his mouth. "The formenter, gatherer, inflictor, and throat of the silent scream." Another child spoke from a stall on Samantha's right. "The ferryman of lost dreams, shattered hope, and withering despair." At the final stall appeared the smith's son. There was a bloody vacancy where his front teeth had once been. "The ready right hand of terror, the inward staring eye, know me, and know the unspeakable." Bellick stayed close to Vala as Samantha stepped out into the sunlight. Vala exited behind her, pushed back her hood, and forced her way through the gathered crowd. "Make room, all of you! Bellick, a hand!" The townspeople pressed in, questioning, accusing. Bellick shouted for the throng to make way as Samantha staggered forward. Vala parted the crowd ahead of the little girl, who continued on. Her movements were erratic, spasmodic at some points, yet graceful and almost liquid at others. The knot of people proceeded past the shops on the eastern edge of town. Samantha sped up her pace, and several of the townspeople fell behind. Bellick gasped for air, his face red with exertion. They had made their way along a desolate stretch of dirt road, little more than a path out into the fields beyond. Samantha stumbled out onto a patch of dead grass, stopped, turned. Her head straightened and the demon's gale speak burst forth once again. "Seek you to stand before me? Then come!" The girl grinned slowly, but when she spoke next, it was with the voice of only a child, of little Samantha Hallstaff. "We can play Rough House together." Without warning, the girl's eyes closed, her body went limp and collapsed. Vala rushed forward and leaned close to make sure Samantha still lived. She could hear the child's breath. Most of the townspeople who had fallen behind caught up now, circling the demon hunter. Bellick stood nearby, steadying his breathing. Vala looked up as if expecting the demon to fall out of the sky. Then she looked down. She took note of the blighted grass, running her fingers over it. It spread out over a large expanse, stretching far and tapering on either side, forming the general shape of a massive eye. There were black spots throughout as well, demonic contamination. "Healer, what's below us?" Bellick's eyebrow lifted. "Nothing." "That ain't exactly so." Both Vala and Bellick turned to one of the observers, a rotund farmer with a bushy white mustache. "The River Bosham would be right 'bout underneath our feet." Bella watched Vala, and whether or not it was a trick of the light he was unsure, but it seemed that she had gone slightly pale. "But I heard the river as I rode last night. I hear it faintly even now." The mustached farmer brow dripped in what appeared to be mild annoyance. "That ain't the real Bosham. Just a channel dug out by settlers ages ago, meant to divert the water. 'Cause the real Bosham flows out of the Deadfall Mountains." The farmer turned and pointed northeast. "And pretty soon comes to a sinkhole. Then it goes underground, runs through these parts deep below for quite ways before coming back up 2 days' journey to the west." Vala scanned the immediate surroundings. "No well?" "Soil outside of town's fertile enough, but the ground right here is harder than iron. Easier for the old-timers to dig the channel." Vala sighed as she replied, "The sinkhole in the place where the river resurfaces. There are no other ways to get there?" The farmer spat. "Nope." "And where's the sinkhole?" The farmer nodded toward the mountain. "'Bout half a day that way." Bellick peered at Vala inquisitively. So what now?" The sawyer's daughter raised her hood and swept the crowd with a gaze. "Stay here and stay together. There is strength in numbers. Take Samantha back to the stables. Bind and lock away any other children under 16 summers." She looked again to Bellick. "And get me my horse so I can go kill your demon." It sounded like a thunderstorm. Bella stood at the lip of the cavity into which the Bosham flowed, her eyes lost in the swirling waters of the sinkhole. The river entered the depression here and spiraled slowly at the edges, more vigorously inwards, before finally disappearing into the darkness at its center, down into the unknown below. The spray of it felt cool on her face as the twisting vortex and the sound like a gale took Vala's mind back to the night weeks after the attack on her village. Vala and Halissa were huddled together for warmth as the rain pounded the earth. Halissa had fallen into an exhausted sleep, but as had been the case for so many nights before, she was beset by nightmares of the massacre. Halissa woke up screaming and ran. Nearby, the swollen river raced. Halissa ran too close to its banks, and she slipped in the mud. Halissa reached out her hand. Vala had feared that Halissa would be swept away, lost forever, lost like the rushing waters that spiraled now into the core of the sinkhole, so very much like an eyeless socket. Her heart sank at the recollection, but she had grasped Halissa's hand. It had worked out. Everything had worked out in the end. Back in the here and now, the absence in Vala's memory was more pronounced, a persistent nothingness. Whatever the missing piece was, Vala vowed, it did not matter. She felt more tired than ever, but she would finish this, for Halissa. She knew that her armor would only weigh her down, so she shed it, piece by piece. Her weapon she placed in a satchel given to her by Bellick for just such a purpose. In the satchel were also flint and tinder wrapped in goatskin. To these she added her bolas and various explosive-tipped bolts. She removed her cloak and hood and placed them in the satchel as well so they would not encumber her in the water. Once she stripped her vestments, Vala cinched the satchel and stepped to the edge of the cleft. Vala could think of nothing more unconscionable than a demon that would corrupt children. She felt heat rise within her core, a seething fury. But that was what the demon wanted, wasn't it? She thought of Delios, of his failure. A demon hunter must always temper hatred with discipline. Part of her knew that she might not survive the plunge, that the churning water could pull her to a watery death. Vala took a deep breath and jumped. It was a kind of isolated chaos within the roiling eye of the sinkhole. The world surrendered to obscurity as her muscles struggled to negotiate her body's orientation. Her chest burned with held breath. She fought to maintain her grip on the satchel in the midst of it all. She was whipped, rolled, thrust, and submerged deeper and farther until her consciousness threatened to abandon her completely. The darkness and lack of potential awareness were absolute. There was a sense of rapid movement. Various parts of her body struck stony protrusions as she was carried by the river. And then her fingers found a snag. She had grasped a thick stalagmite and was bracing against the rushing tide. She pulled her head clear and drew in as much air as she could hold. She felt the satchel in her hand and was relieved. The water in her eyes made it impossible to see, and even after she wiped her face against her arm, her vision did not clear. The air was cool down here. Vala probed with her foot and felt a wall of stone. Finally, the blurriness diminished as she swung the satchel onto a ledge and dragged herself out of the raging torrent. She sat, allowing her body a moment to rest, taking in her surroundings. The immediate area opened into what appeared to be a warren of tunnels and alcoves. Luminescent algae coated the walls, stalactites and stalagmites, rocky columns, and parts of the roof. The light cast by it provided an eerie, unearthly glow that rendered a torch unnecessary. Good, Vala thought. I can keep both hands free. Detecting any noise other than the gushing water was impossible, as the thunderous roar echoed throughout. Vala removed her cloak, which, remarkably, had remained mostly dry, from the satchel and fastened it for warmth. She unpacked her weapons, relieved to see that her crimson bolt was still among them, then set her crossbows and stood, one in each hand. She gazed into a cave with jagged limestone spikes protruding from top and bottom, like a shark set to swallow its prey, and she spotted a shadow among the blackness beyond, flitting from one side to the other. Vala pressed after it, and as she did, she felt the first brush of the demon's mind against hers, a malefic, detestable presence lurking just outside her awareness, a wolf prowling at the edge of a dark forest. The sensation became more insistent as she stepped into the cave, senses fully alert. Her pulse raced. "Welcome!" a voice spoke in her head. Vala moved to the back of a cave where a tunnel receded into darkness, the algae much sparser upon the walls. Here and there were patches of the same black substance found at the well in Holbrook. She knelt and dipped her finger in the viscous muck. "What persistence you have! What desire! Why, the eye will see!" Vala stood and snuck into the tunnel, crossbows ready. There was movement across the floor, a slithering, and then she saw it, its skin glistening just a bit in what little light existed, a black tentacle that rose, unfurled, and whipped out at her. Vala fired a bolt and the thing jerked backward, but the crossbow was a poor weapon for this task. She slung one crossbow and removed a dagger even as she felt the demon probing inside her head now, a dull ache. She envisioned black tendrils within her mind, not unlike the oily appendage that attacked her. "Sawyer, daughter!" Vala sliced across, shearing the tip off as the tentacle shot forward. It reacted quickly, but the presence in her mind was burrowing deeper. "Delightful memories you keep inside, bloodsack! Ripe for plucking!" It felt as though needles were picking Vala's head as she pressed on. The walls were thick with black, glistening sludge. "Village, family, friends, warmth, shelter, happy times, then demons swarm like locusts." The wall seemed to squirm now, as more tentacles emerged from the mire uncoiled. Vala slung her second crossbow, removed another dagger, and lashed out, left and right. "Running! Coward! Abandoned family! Left them to die!" Vala wrestled with the part of her that said it was true. "You are the demon's greatest weapon." "There's nothing I could have done but die myself!" Vala shouted as she somersaulted over a massive coil, slicing deep. "I did what I had to do. I survived." She then found herself in a larger circular gallery that opened into a grander space beyond, an outer half-ring fronted by rock columns, thin in the middle, wide at the top and bottom. Her head pounded. The demon was driving harder. "Screams! Death! Village purged! Family purged! You will not manipulate me as you did Delios! Blood! Yes! Blood like river! Enough! Face me and let's have done with this! The eye sees! I see you!" The thunder of the water was more distant in this area, and Vala thought briefly that she heard a little girl's giggle. She saw movement in the outer ring and gave chase. The crowd chamber led to another tunnel, another bend, and she was again surrounded by darkness, her feet making squishing sounds in the black ozone on the ground, and then the roar of the river muffled all other noise. She was circling back around toward the water. A form, a light haze that seemed to be a head peeking from behind a corner, appeared and was gone. Vala rounded the bend and saw briefly what looked like a child. The hellspawn must have brought one of the children down here with it, to use as a mortal shield. The figure ran. Vala pursued. They were drawing closer to the river. Vala could see now that it was a girl with long blonde hair. "Thunder! Rain!" The child stopped and stood eerily still. Vala slowed her approach, ready for any surprise, her heart hammering within her chest. "Sister!" The girl turned, and Vala saw Halissa's features. "River! Running! Mind broken!" It couldn't be Halissa, of course, but it looked so very much like her. The girl was pale as death. Her waterlogged skin had begun to fall away in strips. One eye bulged. Vala froze. The pain in her head was unbearable, but the wall that had blocked her from the memory obscured since before her arrival, that wall was crumbling. And she remembered. Yes! She remembered the night Halissa ran, maddened, completely unhinged by weeks of nightmares and living like an animal, tormented by the carnage she had witnessed. She remembered chasing her through the storm. The little girl in the cave smiled, and the claw of a black crab reached out. Halissa had slipped, and Vala's heart had turned to ice. Halissa had stretched forth her hand, and Vala had taken it. But the rain-soaked grip could not be held. Halissa had screamed once and was gone. "Buried it, you tried! Buried so deep! But the eye sees! No good dreams for you!" Vala dropped to her knees before the girl in the cave. A black tentacle squirmed out from the rushing river, sliding snake-like across the floor. It closed around Vala's arm and pulled. One of her daggers fell from cold fingers. It didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered. "Why the children? Children are hope. I am the destroyer of hope. I am the terror of murder by the beloved. I am the rage of innocence lost." Destruction begets terror as terror begets hate as hate begets destruction. Yes! Delios! So much hate in that one! Beneath it all, a scared boy, eager to destroy. She felt the stone rough against her as she was drawn to the river's edge. "You are mine now!" But there was one more piece of the missing memory. She remembered the campfire. The tentacle pulled her under. Another reached up and grasped her free arm. The water was much deeper here. Vala closed her eyes, unwilling yet to let out the last of her breath. What final piece was left? The campfire, the mental exercises. She had buried the recollection of Halissa's death, But why? Remember. So the demon would go searching for it. In her mind's eye, Vala saw the infiltration as hundreds of smoky tendrils. When a demon peers into you, into the deepest recesses of your mind, then you may peer back if you know how. Vala imagined her consciousness locking to a tendril, following it to its source. What is this? It is the most dangerous thing a demon hunter can do. Her consciousness invaded the presence that had so deeply latched onto her. A malignant red eye dominated her mental vision. She peered toward it, seeking. Her surroundings were alive with squirming, crawling things, but as she probed deeper, as her insistence mounted, they took form. With a sudden clarity, she understood what she faced. Vala's eyes opened beneath the water, and there in the inky depths, they burned like fire. I see you. She felt the presence retreating from within her mind, felt the grip of her arms loosen. She slashed forward with her remaining dagger, slicing the tentacles. The river threatened to sweep her away, but not this time. The river would take nothing else from her. Hephaestus is not even your true, cursed name. Vala kicked toward the surface and dug her fingers into the rocky ledge. She pulled herself up, and the corpse of Halissa, a look of fear now upon its face, took a step back. I see you, Valdraxis, foot soldier, outcast, derelict. The dead girl turned and ran. During the wars against the prime evils, you led a failed campaign, maligned and scorned. You once were a demon of import in the hells, but now you are considered anathema even to your kind. Something shambled out of the darkness to her right, something that might have at one time been a toad, malformed now, bloated with massive lambent eyes. It reached for her. I will not be denied! Vala bit down on her dagger, dug into a pouch under her jerkin, and was happy to find that her bolas were still there. She cast a bola which wrapped around an amphibian arm. The creature raised the appendage to its face, staring at the rope and spheres stupidly. The bola exploded, vaporizing the thing's arm and taking the head with it as Vala grabbed the dagger from her mouth and stalked after the little girl. Not really the corpse of Halissa, just a form taken by the demon to weaken her. It is you who are weak now, lapdog. More things came from recesses in the walls, monstrous things. The first scuttled sideways and swung a single massive claw. Vala vaulted above the creature and drove her dagger through its carapace. The fiend's legs buckled beneath it. She retrieved one of her crossbows. Another apparition lunged. Vala fired one bolt that shattered something resembling an arm, then shot a second through a bulbous eye. Moving all the while, chasing the impostor of her sister, she tossed the dagger and drew her second crossbow. A long passage greeted her. The walls came alive as countless insects, roaches, centipedes, beetles. A slick, wet tide of pestilence surged toward her almost as one. The demon hunter stopped, took a knee, and fired multiple bolts from the crossbow. There were several small explosions. She felt the heat on her face, and when the flames dissipated, the squirming host was little more than a slimy paste on the walls. The rest she crushed as she sprinted forward. Vala rounded a bend, but what she saw was no longer the little girl. It was a mirror image of herself. Vala stepped up, removing the crimson bolt from beneath her leather. The mirror of Vala opened her mouth, and a thick black sludge bubbled out, pouring down her chin. Runnels of the substance bled from her nostrils. The scar on her jaw split apart and ooze seeped through. Her eyes filled with the black liquid, and the mirror of Vala cried tears of demon blood. No, that is not me. That will not be me. The mirror of Vala darted away past a darkened alcove, around a massive stone pillar. The demon hunter followed, crossbows prepared to fire. She rounded the pillar, spun, and dropped to one knee, speaking. I see you, minion of the burning hells! She spoke the words even as the demon emerged from the alcove, swinging a thick arm that ended with chitinous serrated blade. A strike that would have surely beheaded the sawyer's daughter an instant before. In the name of all those who have suffered, I cast you out." The demon was a hulking monstrosity. Its body was like those of creatures that existed deep below the sea, where light never reached. Tumescent black tentacles served as legs. Its upper torso was covered in an armor-like shell bursting with spiky protrusions, and the entirety of the nightmarish thing was coated in a viscous, midnight-hued ooze. "Begone and be damned, and may you never return!" A massive red eye with a narrow slit stared back at her. The slit widened as Vala fired the crimson bolt. The bolt struck the eye, popping it like a grape. The runes on the shaft of the bolt glowed, and there was an explosion of light. The weather had started to turn cold. Vala stood, hood down, looking at the large wooden cross that marked Halissa's grave. Several weeds had sprouted since she was last here. The graves of her parents, where she had finally buried what remained of them, were here as well, and surrounding them were the burial sites of all the other villagers who had been butchered. Joseph approached but stayed silent, the light breeze stirring his cloak. Vala knelt and began pulling weeds. "Word from the village," Joseph said, his tone irritatingly even as always. "All is as well as can be expected, given the circumstances. The children are themselves once again, with no memory of their actions, though many of them will grow up without parents. Bellic and the others are offering their homes to the orphans." Vala set her jaw. "Good." Joseph shifted his weight slightly. "There is word also that the townspeople are thankful." The sawyer's daughter rose, glancing at Joseph as she did so. There were 3 gashes still healing across the left side of his face. "What of Delios?" Vala asked. "Taken care of," Joseph replied. Vala waited for further explanation. The master hunter only eyed her impassively. "I've heard whisperings," she said. "Premonitions from those gifted with precognitive ability, that a star will fall on Tristram 7 days from now." Joseph's eyes took Vala's measure. "You heard true. The falling star is believed to be a sign of the prophecy. The others have asked that I send our best hunter to investigate." Vala pulled an item from beneath her armor. A moment of silence passed between them, broken finally by Joseph. "What you did was a gamble, but it worked." The sawyer's daughter unfolded the letter she had wrote in Havenwood, bent down, and placed it before the grave, setting a rock atop it. "Told you I'd come visit," she whispered. She stood and looked at her mentor. "Everything's a test, you're fond of saying. Life is a test. I failed at the ruins, but this is a test I passed, and I learned much from it. I learned that we truly can be our own worst enemies, but I also learned that no matter how much the demons may destroy, they cannot destroy hope." The setting sun reflected in Vala's eyes. "It may be effective for you to simply turn off your emotions, but that is not my way. It was liberating for a time to live with the promise of a different life, to live a contented lie. How easy it would be to go back to living that lie," Vala thought. Joseph stared at her with that appraising gaze of his. Vala went on. "It was a good dream, but for now it must remain just that, a dream." The sawyer's daughter pulled her hood up. I'm back and I'm ready to continue the hunt." She turned away. "Where do you think you're going?" Joseph asked flatly. "Tristram. The others asked you to send the best. I am the best. I'm going, and you have less than a few heartbeats to try and stop me." Vala waited with her back to the master hunter, then lifted her scarf. An instant later she strode away, crested a rise, and was gone from sight. Joseph watched, and if there had been an observer present, that person would have witnessed an anomaly, something playing at the master hunter's lip, something that resembled a smile. This was Hatred and Discipline by Micky Neilson, read by Katie Bunn.